May 8, 1945. In London, champagne flowed through Trafalgar Square. In Paris, lovers kissed beneath the Arc de Triomphe. In New York, ticker tape rained down like confetti from heaven itself. But 4,000 miles west, in a prison camp outside Topeka, Kansas, Victory in Europe Day arrived differently. An American captain stood before assembled prisoners, women in faded dresses, hands calloused from farm work, faces weathered by prairie sun. He cleared his throat. The words came out simple, clean, final. The war is over. You can go home. Silence. Not the silence of shock or disbelief. Something stranger, heavier. A young woman in the front row, maybe 23, blonde hair tied back with string, began to cry. Not tears of joy, tears of fear. 9, she whispered. Number. The officer blinked. He'd prepared for celebration, for rushed packing, for gratitude. He got none of it. Another woman, older, stepped forward. Her English came broken but deliberate. Home? No home left, sir. Please. We stay here. The captain's face betrayed his confusion. These were prisoners. Enemy prisoners. German women who'd served the Luftwaffe, the Wehrmacht Medical Corps, the Nazi war machine. They were supposed to want freedom, instead they wanted their chains. What the captain couldn't know, what none of them could know, was that the barbed wire surrounding that Kansas camp had become something democracy made steel into. Not a cage, but a shield against a world that had eaten itself alive. This is the story of captivity that became refuge, of women who traced their fingers along prison fences, begging not to be freed, of a truth so twisted it exposes what freedom really means when your homeland becomes a graveyard. Their story begins not in America, but in the belly of a ship crossing an ocean of dread. The troop ship cut through gray water under gray sky. Below deck, in compartments that reeked of diesel and fear, German women huddled on metal bunks. They'd been captured in France, in Belgium, in the chaos of the Wehrmacht's collapse. Some were Luftwaffe auxiliaries, radio operators, switchboard clerks, women who'd worn military uniforms but never fired a shot. Others were nurses, following field hospitals as they retreated. A few had simply been in the wrong village when American tanks rolled through. Nazi propaganda had prepared them for this moment. "The Americans are beasts," the posters had screamed. "Destroyers. Men without souls." So they waited in that ship's hold, 22-year-old Hannelore clutching a photograph of her mother in Hanover, 26-year-old Liselle staring at rust-stained walls, 30-year-old Greta, a nurse who'd seen men die screaming, now wondering if she'd scream the same way on American soil. The ocean crossing took 12 days. 12 days of vomiting into buckets. 12 days of whispered prayers and silent terror. 12 days imagining what waited on the other side. Torture chambers, starvation cells, the brutality they'd been promised. When the ship finally docked in New York Harbor, Hannelore wrote in her diary with trembling hand, "We are dead women walking. God have mercy." But God, it seemed, had different plans. The Statue of Liberty watched impassively as the prisoners disembarked. Hannelore glanced up at that copper face, torch raised high, and thought, "She lifts her light for everyone but us." Guards herded them onto trains, not cattle cars, but passenger cars, seats with cushions, windows they could see through. Lisel whispered to Greta, "Where are the chains?" There were no chains. The train rolled west through a country untouched by bombs, through Pennsylvania farmland where barns stood whole and painted, through Ohio valleys where church steeples reached toward heaven instead of lying shattered on the ground, through Indiana, Illinois, into the endless prairie of Kansas where the sky stretched so wide it felt like falling upward. The women pressed their faces to the glass, stunned into silence. No rubble, no craters, no orphans picking through debris. "It's like the war never happened here," Hannelore whispered. "Like God forgot to destroy it." When they arrived at Camp Concordia, Kansas, the guards lined them up in the yard. A colonel addressed them through an interpreter. His voice carried across the September wind. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will be fed 3 meals daily. You will be given work assignments. You will be housed in sanitary barracks. Any mistreatment will be reported and punished. The women exchanged glances. This had to be a trick. But that night in the mess hall they discovered it wasn't. The trays came loaded with food, real food, roast chicken, mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans, bread, white bread, soft as cloud, and something brown and sticky in small jars. "Was this das?" Greta asked, sniffing it suspiciously. A guard grinned. "Peanut butter, ma'am. Spread it on the bread." She did. The taste exploded across her tongue, sweet, salty, rich, impossibly thick. She couldn't stop eating it. None of them could. Hannelore wrote that night, "They feed us peanut butter. Sticky, strange, but rich. I cannot stop eating it. My stomach hurts from fullness. I have not felt full in 3 years." The barracks were wooden, simple, but clean. Bunk beds with real mattresses, blankets that didn't have holes, a stove that actually heated the room. And in the morning a guard brought them soap. Real soap, not the sand and ash mixture they'd been using in Germany. Liesel held that bar of soap like it was made of gold. She turned it over in her hands, brought it to her nose, breathed deep. The smell of lavender filled her lungs. She wept. October 1944 faded into November. The prairie wind turned sharp, carrying the smell of dying corn. The women settled into routines. Wake at 0600. Roll call in the yard. Breakfast, always more food than they could finish. Work details from 800 to 1600. The work varied. Some peeled potatoes in the camp kitchen, mountains of them, their hands cramping by noon. Others sewed in the laundry, mending uniforms under fluorescent lights. The strongest were sent to nearby farms. That's where the transformation began. The farm trucks arrived each morning, guards in the back, rifles across their laps. The women climbed in, 20 at a time, and rode into the Kansas heartland. The first farm belonged to a man named Henderson, 63, weathered, suspicious. His sons were overseas fighting Germans. Now Germans stood in his fields, staring at rows of sugar beets that stretched to the horizon. He watched them from his porch, jaw tight, hands balled into fists. But his crops didn't care about politics. The beets needed harvesting, and his wife couldn't do it alone. The women bent to the work. Their backs screamed, their hands blistered. The Kansas sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. But something happened in those fields. Hannelore started humming while she worked. An old folk song from Bavaria. Liesel joined in. Then Greta. Soon 20 voices rose into the October air, harmonizing over acres of beets. Henderson heard it from his porch. His wife emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "They're singing," she said softly. He grunted. But he listened. By the end of the first week, Henderson's wife brought out pitchers of lemonade. She set them down without a word, but the gesture said everything. The women drank gratefully, and one, a young girl named Anna who'd learned broken English, said, "Thank you, ma'am. God bless you." Henderson's wife nodded, her eyes wet, and walked back inside. The next week she brought cookies. By December, the camps across America, Texas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Kansas, had become small cities of contradiction. These women wore the uniforms of the enemy, yet they laughed over shared meals. They were guarded by armed men, yet they played volleyball in the yard, shouting and diving for the ball like schoolgirls. They were prisoners, yet they tended flower gardens outside their barracks, planting bulbs that would bloom in spring. A 19-year-old guard named Bobby from Tennessee watched them one afternoon. They'd formed a choir. They sang German hymns, American folk songs they'd learned from the radio, even attempted Amazing Grace with thick accents that turned the lyrics into something both foreign and familiar. Bobby wrote home to his mother, "They don't seem like the enemy, Mama. They seem like people who got caught up in something bigger than themselves. Some of them are younger than me. How am I supposed to hate them?" His mother wrote back, "You're not supposed to hate them, son. You're supposed to remember they're human." The camps provided what Germany could not: safety, food, dignity, order. Mail from Europe told a different story. Winter 1944 brought snow to the prairie and letters from home. The mail call happened every Thursday at 1500 hours. The women gathered in the recreation hall, waiting with held breath as the sergeant called out names. Schmidt, Muller, Weber. Hands reached up. Envelopes changed ownership. Some women clutched their letters to their chests, unwilling to open them in public. Others tore them open immediately, desperate for news. What they read broke them. Hannelor's letter came from her mother in Hanover, dated November 2, 1944. The handwriting shook across the page. My darling daughter, the British bombed us again last week. The house is gone, not damaged. Gone. Nothing but a crater where the kitchen used to be. Your father and I sleep in the Braun family's cellar now. There are 11 of us in 2 rooms. Your sister Elsa disappeared after the bombing. We have searched everywhere. I pray she is alive, but I cannot find her. We eat once a day, sometimes twice if we are lucky. Potato soup made from peels. The ration is 1,000 calories now. People are fainting in the bread lines. If you return, I do not know where you will sleep. There is no house. There is barely food. But I miss you. God, I miss you. Stay safe wherever you are. That is all I can pray for now. Hannelore read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, walked to her bunk, and lay down facing the wall. She didn't move for 6 hours. Liesel's letter came from a neighbor in Hamburg. Her family's building had been hit by a firebomb. The neighbor wrote in clinical detail. 3 floors collapsed, 17 people dead, including Liesel's mother and younger brother. Her father had survived but lost his mind. He wandered the streets asking strangers if they'd seen his wife. Liesel didn't cry. She sat very still, the letter in her lap, her face carved from stone. Greta, the nurse, received word that her hometown of Dresden no longer existed. Not metaphorically, literally. The February firebombing had erased it. 25,000 dead, maybe more. The letter described a city transformed into a lunar landscape of ash and chimneys. There are no buildings, her brother wrote, only shapes that used to be buildings. People live in cellars like rats. We burn furniture to stay warm. Children fight over crusts of bread. The weight of knowledge. The women began to understand what going home would mean. Not reunion, rubble, not safety, chaos, not family, ghosts. They shared the letters in whispered conversations after lights out. Hannelore told her bunkmates about her mother sleeping in a stranger's cellar. Liesel described Hamburg's ruins. Greta spoke of Dresden in a voice so flat it sounded mechanical. There is no Dresden, she said. The word still exists, but the place does not. Anna, the youngest at 21, received a letter that mentioned Soviet soldiers entering her village in East Prussia. The letter ended abruptly. No follow-up came. She stopped sleeping. The other women found her at night standing at the window, staring at nothing, her breath fogging the glass. The contrast between their lives behind the wire and their families' lives in Germany carved a chasm of guilt and relief so wide, some women couldn't cross it. They ate 3 meals a day, 3,200 calories according to Red Cross inspections, meat twice weekly, fresh vegetables, milk, coffee. Their mothers ate nettle soup. They slept in heated barracks with real mattresses. Their siblings slept in bombed-out cellars wrapped in newspaper. They washed with soap and hot water. Their fathers hadn't bathed in months. One night in January 1945, Hannelore sat with Liesel and Greta in the recreation hall. The radio played Glenn Miller, In the Mood, and for a moment the war seemed distant. Then Hannelore said quietly, "We are living better as prisoners than our families are living free." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Liesel nodded. "I feel guilty every time I eat." Greta stared at her hands. "I dream about going home. Then I wake up and thank God I'm still here." The news of Hitler's death came in April. The news of surrender came May 8th. The camp commandant assembled the prisoners in the yard. The American flag snapped in the Kansas wind. He stood on a wooden platform flanked by guards and spoke through the interpreter. "Germany has surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. As per the Geneva Convention, you will be repatriated to your homeland in the coming months. Congratulations, you can go home." Silence greeted him. No cheers, no celebration, no relief. The women stood in formation, faces blank, and said nothing. The commandant frowned. He'd expected, what? Gratitude? Joy? He got neither. As the formation dismissed, a woman stepped forward. She was older, maybe 35, a former nurse named Margaret. Her English came slow but clear. "Sir, permission to speak?" "Granted." "Sir, may we stay?" The commandant blinked. "Excuse me? May we stay here? In America? We will work. We will do anything. But please, do not send us back." He stared at her. Behind her, other women nodded. Some wept silently. "I don't understand," he said. "You're free. The war is over. You can go home to your families." Margaret's voice cracked. "Sir, there are no homes, only ruins. There is no food, only hunger. Here we are safe. Here we are fed. Here we are treated like human beings. In Germany, we will be nothing." The commandant had no answer for that. In the weeks that followed, the requests multiplied. Some women wrote formal petitions on scraps of paper, their English clumsy but earnest. "Dear sir, I ask please to stay in America. I will work in kitchen. I will clean floors. I do not want money, only food and place to sleep. My home in Germany is bombed. My family is dead. I have nowhere to go. Please, sir, let me stay." Others approached guards directly during work details. Anna, barely 21, cornered a guard named Jimmy from Oklahoma while peeling potatoes. Her eyes were red from crying. "Please," she said. "You marry me? I stay here, yes? I work hard. I cook. I clean. Please." Jimmy, 23 and scared of girls even without a language barrier, backed away, stammering, "Ma'am, I can't. Regulations say—" She grabbed his sleeve. "Please, Soviet zone, kill me, please." He reported the conversation to his sergeant, his face pale. "Sarge," she was begging. "Not for love, for life." The sergeant sighed. "I know, son. But orders are orders." The real terror centered on one fact: the occupation zones. Germany had been carved into 4 pieces: American, British, French, Soviet. The women didn't fear the Western zones. Those came with food shortages and bombed cities, but at least they came with law. The Soviet zone was different. Letters described what the Red Army did in East Prussia, in Pomerania, in Silesia. Villages emptied overnight. Women dragged from cellars. Mass graves discovered months later. Even in the Western zones, refugees streamed west with stories that made guards turn away in shame when the women translated them. Greta learned her hometown fell to the Soviets. She stopped eating. She lay in her bunk for 3 days, staring at the ceiling, whispering, "Mein Gott," over and over. Hannelore held her hand. "You're not going back there. They said repatriation to all zones. Maybe you get American zone." Greta turned her head. "And if I don't?" Hannelore had no answer. Anna wrote a letter to the American Red Cross. It was found in archives decades later. "I am Anna Schmidt, age 21, from Königsberg. I served as a telephone operator for the Luftwaffe. I did not fight. I did not kill. I only connected wires. My family is gone. My home is now part of Soviet Union. They renamed it Kaliningrad. German people cannot live there anymore. If you send me back to Germany, where do I go? I have no house, no family, no papers. I will walk through ruins until I die. Please, I beg you, let me stay in America. I will work until my hands bleed. I will scrub toilets. I will pick crops. Anything. Just do not send me back to nothing." The Red Cross filed the letter. Policy was policy. The guards' dilemma. The American guards found themselves in an impossible position. They'd been trained to see Germans as fanatics, as true believers in Nazi ideology who'd fight to the death for Hitler. Instead, they saw young women who cried themselves to sleep. Women who flinched when planes flew overhead, even American planes. Women who hoarded bread not from greed, but from muscle memory of starvation. Bobby, the 19-year-old from Tennessee, wrote home again, "Mama, I don't know what to think anymore. These girls don't talk about Hitler. They don't talk about the war. They talk about their mothers, their sisters, their little brothers. They show me pictures of their families and ask if I think they're still alive. One girl, Hannelore, showed me a picture of her little brother. He was maybe 8 years old in the photo, wearing lederhosen, smiling with missing teeth. She asked me, "You think he is okay?" Her English is bad, but I understood. I lied. I told her yes. But her city got bombed 73 times, Mama. How could a little boy survive that? I'm supposed to guard them, but I feel like I'm guarding them from the wrong thing. The war is over, but they're more scared now than ever. The camps became laboratories of contrast. In Camp Concordia, Kansas, women sang in the evenings. In Berlin, women sold their bodies for cigarettes. In Camp Huntsville, Texas, women played volleyball and laughed. In Hamburg, women searched through rubble for their children's bodies. In Camp Algona, Iowa, women planted tomatoes in a small garden behind the barracks. In Cologne, women ate grass. The women understood these contrasts viscerally. Every letter from home drove the knife deeper. Liselle received word that her cousin was prostituting herself to British soldiers for food. Liselle sat in the mess hall that night staring at a plate of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, and said to no one in particular, "My cousin sells her body for bread, and I cannot finish this pie." She pushed the plate away. She never ate pie again. Not everything was despair. The women created small pockets of normalcy, small rebellions against fate. Someone, no one remembered who, had smuggled an accordion into camp. Maybe a guard brought it. Maybe it arrived with the Red Cross shipment. Either way, it appeared. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, the women gathered in the recreation hall. They sang German folk songs from Bavaria, hymns from Lutheran churches, even American songs they'd learned from the radio. "Don't Fence Me In" delivered with such heavy accents that the guards listening outside couldn't help but smile. The accordion player was a woman named Ingrid, 43, a former schoolteacher from Munich. Her fingers danced across the keys, pulling melancholy from metal and wood. The music floated out across the prairie, past the barbed wire, into the Kansas night. It was neither German nor American. It was human. Bobby stood guard one evening, listening. The song was slow, mournful, something about mountains and home. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the longing. He thought, they're singing about a place that doesn't exist anymore. 14 months after VE Day, the bureaucratic machinery finally moved. Trains arrived at the camps. Schedules were posted. Lists were made. Repatriation would proceed in waves, organized by home region and occupation zone. The women stared at those lists like death sentences. Margaret, the nurse who'd first asked to stay, found her name on the list for the Soviet zone. She went to the commandant's office, knocked, entered before permission was granted. "Sir, there is a mistake." The commandant looked up from paperwork. "No mistake, Margaret. Your hometown is in the Soviet sector." "Sir, I cannot go there. The Geneva Convention requires—" "Sir, please," her voice broke. "They will kill me." Or worse, you have heard the stories. You know what happens to German women in the Soviet zone. He had heard the stories. Every officer had. But policy was written in Washington, not Kansas. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. Margaret stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she saluted, a gesture she'd never made as a prisoner, and left. The night before the first transport, the women didn't sleep. They sat in their bunks, packing the few possessions they'd accumulated. A scarf, a photograph, a notebook filled with diary entries, a bar of soap carefully saved. Hannelore held her notebook, the one with the entry about peanut butter, and read through 14 months of captivity documented in ink. The first entry: "We are dead women walking." The last: "I do not want to leave. God help me, I do not want to leave." She closed the notebook. She would take it with her, a record of the time when she'd been a prisoner and felt more human than ever before. Liesel lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She whispered to Greta in the bunk above, "Do you think we'll survive?" Greta was quiet for a long time. Then, We survived the war. Maybe we can survive the peace. The peace is worse than the war. I know. Anna, destined for the American sector, should have felt relief, but her hands shook as she packed. Germany, even the American zone, was still a graveyard, still a place where roofs were luxuries and bread was currency. A guard found her at 0300 standing at the fence, her fingers tracing the barbed wire. "Ma'am, you should be sleeping. Train leaves at 0800. She didn't turn around. "I am memorizing." "Memorizing what?" "This, the fence, the sky, the feeling of safety. So when I am hungry again, I can remember it was real." The guard had no response. He walked away, his throat tight. The trains waited on sidings, their engines breathing steam into the summer air. The women formed up in the yard one last time. Roll call, just like every morning for 14 months. But this time, it was the last time. The commandant spoke briefly. "You've been model prisoners. You've worked hard. You've followed the rules. On behalf of the United States Army, I wish you safe travels and good fortune." Platitudes. Everyone knew it. The women marched to the trains. Guards flanked them, not out of security concerns, but out of something closer to ritual. As they passed through the gate, several women reached out and touched the wooden posts. A goodbye. A memorial. Hannelore was the last to board. She stopped at the train steps and looked back at Camp Concordia. The barracks stood in neat rows. The garden behind Block C showed green tomato plants. The volleyball net sagged in the heat. 14 months ago, she'd entered those gates certain she would die. Now she left them certain she might still die, just somewhere else. She climbed aboard. The return voyage was nothing like the voyage over. The women were no longer scared of their captors. They were scared of their destination. The ship, a converted Liberty ship named the Admiral Stewart, carried 847 women across gray water. They slept in bunks below deck, the smell of diesel and salt everywhere. Some women stayed below the entire voyage, too depressed to move. Others came topside, staring back at the American coast as it vanished into the horizon. Hannelore stood at the rail, watching the Statue of Liberty recede. She remembered seeing it on arrival, a symbol of her imprisonment. Now it felt like a symbol of her loss. "Goodbye," she whispered in English. "Thank you." Beside her, Lucille said nothing. She simply wept. The voyage took 11 days. When they arrived at Bremerhaven, the port was chaos. Thousands of displaced persons milled about. Refugees from the east, former soldiers trying to find their units, families searching for each other. The dock smelled of unwashed bodies and desperation. The women disembarked down the gangplank, carrying their small bags. American military police directed them to processing tents. Hannelore looked around at the ruins of Bremerhaven. The city was a skeleton. Buildings gaped with empty windows. Streets were clearings carved through rubble. Children in rags begged for cigarettes. This was home. This was freedom, she thought. I have made a terrible mistake. I should have begged harder. The women scattered into the ruins like seeds on barren ground. Some found their families, or what remained of them. Reunions in cellars, in refugee camps, in the corners of shattered buildings. Hannelore reached Hanover after 3 days of walking and riding in British military trucks. She found her mother in the cellar she'd described in letters. 11 people living in 2 rooms. Her mother was 47 but looked 70. They held each other and wept. No words were possible. That night, Hannelore ate her first meal back in Germany. Watery soup made from potato peels and turnip greens. A slice of black bread hard as wood. She thought of the roast chicken in Camp Concordia and felt her stomach turn. She was free. She was starving. Liesel never found her father. The neighbor said he'd wandered off one day into the rubble and never returned. Another casualty of the peace. She ended up in a refugee camp outside Hanover, sleeping on a cot with 400 other displaced persons. The camp was run by British officers who did their best with limited resources. Each person got 1,200 calories per day, less than half what she'd received as a prisoner in America. She lost 20 pounds in 3 months. Margaret, sent to the Soviet zone despite her pleas, disappeared. Her name appears on Red Cross lists of missing persons. No one knows what happened to her. Some women fared better. Those with skills, nurses especially, found work with the occupation authorities. The pay was meager, but the work provided purpose. Greta became a nurse at a British military hospital in Hamburg. The British officers treated her with professional courtesy, but she sensed their underlying contempt. To them, she was German, therefore guilty. She wrote in her diary, "In America, I was the enemy but treated with dignity. Here I am among my own people and treated with suspicion." Over the following years, some women wrote letters to the camps where they'd been held. The letters found their way to former guards, to commandants, to the Red Cross. Anna Schmidt wrote to Bobby, the young guard from Tennessee, "Dear Bobby, I hope this letter finds you well and home safe with your mother. I remember you showed me her picture once. She has a kind face. I am in Stuttgart now, in the American zone. I work in a laundry for the U.S. Army. The pay is 35 marks per week. It is not much, but I am grateful. I wanted to tell you that I was right to be scared. Germany is not the same country. There are no houses, only walls. There is no food, only lines. There are no families, only ghosts. Sometimes I dream I am back in Camp Concordia. I dream I am peeling potatoes in the kitchen and you are making jokes I don't understand. I wake up and I cry because I want to go back. Is that strange? To want to be a prisoner again? Thank you for being kind to me. You did not have to be. I will remember you always. Your friend, Anna." Bobby kept that letter until he died in 1989. Hannelore wrote to the commandant at Camp Concordia in 1948. "Sir, I do not know if you remember me. I was prisoner 4732. I arrived in fall of 1944 and left summer of 1946. I wanted to write and say thank you. You treated us with more dignity than we deserved. You fed us when our own country could not. You gave us safety when the world was chaos. I am in Hanover now. My mother and I live in 2 rooms of a bombed building. We share it with another family. We have electricity sometimes. We have running water never. But we are alive, and that is because of the food I ate in your camp. I was strong when I returned. Many women were not. They died in the winter of 1946. I did not, because of you. I know it is strange to thank my captor, but you were more than that. You were proof that even in war, humans can choose kindness. I will never forget Camp Concordia. It saved my life. With gratitude, Hannelore Weber." The commandant framed that letter. He hung it in his office and later in his home. When visitors asked about it, he would say simply, "A reminder that the enemy is rarely what you expect." In the 1950s, something unexpected happened. As immigration restrictions eased and Germany began to rebuild, some of the former prisoners applied to emigrate to America. They'd tasted American abundance once, they'd lived in American safety once, and they wanted it again, not as prisoners, but as free people. Anna Schmidt was among the first. She applied in 1952 and was accepted in 1953. She arrived in New York Harbor for the second time, this time without guards, without fear. She settled in Oklahoma near where Bobby lived. They met for coffee once. He was married now, with children. She worked in a restaurant. "I made it back," she told him. He smiled. "Welcome home." Hannelore tried to immigrate but was denied. Her Luftwaffe service counted against her. She lived in Germany until she died in 1987, age 63. Her diary, found after her death, became part of a museum collection documenting the war. The last entry, dated May 1987, read, "I dream of Kansas sometimes. The prairie wind, the smell of corn, the taste of peanut butter. Strange what a person misses. I was a prisoner there, but I was also more free than I have ever been since." Liesel immigrated to Canada in 1957. She married a Canadian soldier who'd been part of the occupation forces. They had 3 children. She rarely spoke of the war, but every Thanksgiving she made sure her table overflowed with food. Her children thought she was just generous. She was compensating for memory, for the years when there was never enough. Greta never left Germany. She became head nurse at a hospital in Hamburg, worked until retirement, and devoted her life to healing. She told an interviewer in 1982, "I spent my youth in war. I spent my captivity learning that enemies can be kind. I spent my life trying to repay that kindness to others." She died in 1996, age 82. The story of the German women POWs in America is a footnote in history. Most textbooks don't mention it. Most documentaries skip it. It doesn't fit the narrative, neither triumph nor tragedy, but something stranger. It's the story of how captivity became refuge, how freedom became fear, how the enemy's land felt safer than home. The paradox they embodied exposes uncomfortable truths about war and its aftermath. Freedom is not merely the absence of chains. It is the presence of safety, dignity, and hope. Without those, freedom is just another word for wandering through ruins. Captivity is not merely the presence of chains. It can also be structure, food, and mercy. With those, even prisoners can feel human. The women who begged to stay in American camps were not betraying their homeland. They were acknowledging a truth more honest than propaganda. Home had ceased to exist, and survival mattered more than loyalty to dirt and rubble. In the decades that followed, many of the American guards who served at those camps spoke about their experiences. Bobby from Tennessee became a teacher. He told his students about the German women who sang in the barracks, who cried when they heard they could go home. "I learned something important," he would say. "The enemy isn't born. They're made by circumstances bigger than any one person. And when those circumstances change, the enemy becomes just another human trying to survive." The commandant at Camp Concordia, Colonel James Richardson, gave an interview in 1973. "People ask me if I ever felt conflicted, guarding women who didn't want to leave. The answer is yes, every day. But here's what I understood. We weren't guarding them from escaping. We were guarding them from the chaos outside. And when we sent them back to that chaos, we failed them. Not legally. We followed every rule. But morally, I still wonder." He paused in that interview, his eyes distant. "They thanked us for imprisoning them." That's how bad things had gotten. Anna Schmidt lived until 2009, age 85. She was the last known survivor of the German women POW camps in America. In her final interview conducted by a graduate student in 2008, she was asked, "What do you want people to remember about your experience?" She thought for a long moment. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, folded in her lap. "I want them to remember that the world is more complicated than good and evil. I served the wrong side in the wrong war. But the people who should have been my enemies showed me more kindness than my own country could. Does that make me a traitor? Does that make them saints? Number. It makes us all human beings trying to survive in a world gone mad." She paused. "I was free when I returned to Germany. But I was never as safe as when I was a prisoner in Kansas. That's the truth. It's not a comfortable truth, but it's true." Camp Concordia, Kansas is gone now. The barracks were dismantled in 1948. The land returned to farming. Corn grows where women once sang. But a section of the original fence remains, preserved as a historical marker. Visitors can touch the barbed wire, now rusted orange, sagging between wooden posts. A plaque tells the story. It mentions that over 3,000 German prisoners, including approximately 400 women, were held there during the war. It mentions that they worked on local farms. It mentions that they were repatriated in 1946. What it doesn't mention is that many begged to stay. That detail is too uncomfortable. It doesn't fit the story America tells about itself. Liberator, victor, beacon of freedom. The idea that some people found more freedom inside American prison camps than they did in their own liberated homeland challenges everything. But it's true. 79 years after VE Day, we can look back and see the strange poetry in their story. Women who were taught to hate Americans discovered that Americans fed them. Women who expected brutality found kindness. Women who should have celebrated freedom chose captivity instead. Their story is a reminder that war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when the displaced find homes, when the hungry are fed, when the traumatized heal. For these women, the war didn't end in May 1945. It ended gradually, painfully, in the years that followed, if it ever ended at all. They were prisoners twice, first behind American barbed wire, then behind the barbed wire of their own ruined memories. But for a brief moment, in camps scattered across the American Midwest, they were also something else. Witnesses to the possibility that even enemies can treat each other with dignity. That even in captivity, humanity can flourish. That even in the depths of the worst war in human history, small acts of mercy still mattered. When the officers stood before them in May 1945 and said, "You can go home," they were speaking a language the women no longer understood. Home had become a foreign word. Safety lived behind the wire now. And when those women touched the barbed wire one last time before boarding the trains east, they were saying goodbye not to a prison, but to the only refuge they had left. That's the revelation. That's the truth that turns everything upside down. Captivity was refuge. Freedom was exile. The enemy was mercy. And home was nowhere. Their tears at the gate were not tears of joy at liberation. They were tears of grief at being cast back into the ruins. And somewhere in that paradox lies a truth about war, about freedom, about what it means to be human when the world falls apart. They were prisoners who begged not to be freed. And history has never been quite the same since. In memory of all those who found themselves on the wrong side of history and discovered that mercy wears unexpected faces.